2, where I'm going to look at international subversion. Now, I've spoken a lot in the past about fabricated terror, and this is a term put forward by Dr. Nick Colostrom, author of Terror on the Tube. And if you're not aware of this concept, I suggest you go on my website, top left-hand corner, you'll find 2 links, 9/11 shows and 7/7 shows, where you'll find hours and hours and hours of evidence-based interviews all about fabricated terror. I do not believe that the mainstream media have told the truth about 9/11 nor the London bombings, and you'd need to watch quite a few hours of interviews and evidence on my website in order to understand what really happened. But this is not a lecture about the evidence. As I said, I recommend Dr. Nick Colostrom's book, Behind the Veil of 7/7, which pretty much proves that the London bombings were blamed on had nothing to do with it whatsoever. Right, now I wanted to bring attention of this to MPs, and I started a campaign in 2012 called Tell Your MP About 7/7, and I was encouraging Richplanet viewers to download 40-odd pages from my website, take it to their MP, and ask them to consider the information that the London bombings were indeed a fabricated terror event. And I actually gave my MP, I went to see my MP in September 2012. I gave him a copy of Dr. Nick Colostrom's book. I gave him a copy of 7/7 Ripple Effect, which is a film that I recommend on the London bombings. I also gave him the 40-odd pages of documents, and he actually said to me, "It wouldn't surprise me." That's what he said. And a number of others managed to get letters from their MPs in response to our assertions that the London bombings were in some way fabricated. And all of these MPs wrote letters in response to those claims. And they were not all negative. Some of them, like this one, read, "Thank you very much for having taken the time to join me at the Victoria Hall at Grange over Sands Centre on Saturday morning in order to discuss your concerns about so many unexplained loose ends in recent events of national significance. I am pleased to confirm that I will look for the information that you have indicated as being so crucial to a full understanding of the threat to democracy from so many rich and self-interested people." So this MP, Tim Farron, that's probably about as far as he could go without losing his job. And there were a number of responses which showed that some of the MPs were taking note of this very compelling evidence. Now, I actually got an email from a Scottish MP saying that he would discuss this issue with his colleagues. And throughout 2013, more and more Richplanet viewers were taking these documents to their MP, and some of them also were giving their MPs copies of Dr. Nick Colostrom's book. And this is a TV programme that I recorded with Dr. Nick Colostrom, where we actually went through all of the MPs' responses, and as I say, they weren't all negative. So this is something that MPs we know were talking about. Possibly not talking about it on the green seats of Parliament out in the open, but in the background I'm fairly sure that there were a number of MPs who were interested in this information and possibly don't buy the official story. Now, I think that may have influenced what I'm about to show you, the fact that MPs were considering this information, because that obviously would be a huge threat to the people who organised 7/7. And I think this could have provoked what I'm going to show you now.
British Prime Minister David Cameron has described people who question the official account of the 9/11 attacks as non-violent extremists. The remarks made in his speech at the United Nations General Assembly have incited a political activist to voluntarily hand himself into the police as a so-called non-violent extremist. Press TV's Isa Ali followed him to Scotland Yard Police headquarters in London to hear his story.
A 9/11 activist in London has handed himself in to Britain's counter-terrorism police following the speech given by UK Prime Minister David Cameron to the United Nations Security Council last Friday. Nick Colostrom was responding to remarks made by Cameron equating people who question 9/11, 7/7 and Western policy towards the Middle East with Takfiri preachers who radicalise extremists.
But as the evidence emerges about the backgrounds of those convicted of terrorist offences, it is clear that many of them were initially influenced by preachers who claim not to encourage violence, but whose worldview can be used as a justification for it. And we know what this worldview is. The peddling of lies, that 9/11 was a Jewish plot or the 7/7 London attacks were staged. The idea that Muslims are persecuted all over the world as a deliberate act of Western policy.
Colostrom explained his decision to hand himself in to police to Press TV.
David Cameron has redefined terrorism at the United Nations to include people who believe that the London bombings involve government complicity, or in some degree arranged, which I certainly do believe, and I published a book on the subject. And also, I believe 9/11 was an inside job. I do think Islamic nations are being selectively targeted, perfectly obvious. And if the police force are going by his directive, what constitutes terrorism, it seems to me that they need to arrest me. Well, we want to report a possible terror threat. We've got a bit of evidence. Right. And wondered if we could just come in and report it.
Right, regarding terror threats, so you'll have to go to the police station. Let me make a phone call for you.
The police declined to arrest Colostrom on this occasion, but he says non-violent extremism, as defined by PM Cameron, could see many Muslims arrested in the future for holding views similar to his. He describes this as yet another example of racial profiling. Isa Ali, Press TV in London.
So Nick Colostrom, a terrorist. I've heard it all now. And this is what David Cameron would have you believe. Extremists at work. Now, I was just as disgusted as Nick about David Cameron's words, but I reacted in a slightly different way. I wrote to the Prime Minister via my MP, and in my letter I said, "Dear Mr Cameron, in your UN speech you said the peddling of lies that 9/11 was a Jewish plot and the 7/7 London attacks were staged. In this statement regarding the 7/7 bombings, you are accusing me and thousands of British people of being liars. This is a demonstrably libelous statement. I challenge you to a public debate on a subject which you have brought to light, which is, were the London bombings a staged event? Having made such statements, you surely should back up the statements with evidence and then be challenged on your evidence in public. If you do not debate this issue in public with those you accuse of being liars, then your actions are that of a dictator. I await your response." So, I got a letter from the Home Office via my MP. Cameron was not prepared to debate in public, and they just referred me to the official inquest papers. Many of the Richplanet viewers who took papers to their MPs were also directed to the official inquest papers. The completely phony inquest. An inquest which started with the presumption that those four who were blamed by the media for carrying it out must have done it. There was no evidence examined to test the guilt or innocence of the four. It was presumed from word go. The purpose of the inquest was to try and determine whether the security services or others could have prevented it. It wasn't to test who carried out the bombings. And this is an inquest with 56 murders and not a single post-mortem. How can you call that a proper inquest? A complete whitewash. And this is what they've fobbed people like me off with regards to this issue. Okay. Now then, when these fake events occur, such as 9/11 and the London bombings, many countries report these events as our media does. But not all countries buy into this international subversion. And I'm going to talk about one of those countries in the rest of today's talk. Can anyone guess what country I'm going to talk about? 2-3 people said Malaysia. Spot on. I'm going to talk about Malaysia. Now, because it's a very interesting country and various things have happened pertaining to Malaysia. Which I think shed a lot of light on world geopolitics and subversion. Now, let's just take a look at this article here. We're all familiar with this alleged missing airliner, which supposedly went missing in March last year, and the official story is it's still missing. A massive jumbo jet packed full of passengers. They allegedly don't know where it is. And we look at this article here. It says, Missing Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, the 14 conspiracy theories that could explain where the plane is and what happened to it. Now, many people contacted me while this subject was being played out. They said, Richard, are you going to do a TV show about this? What do you think happened to it? And I didn't get sucked into this because it's very difficult to get first-hand evidence from incidences like this. How do you get first-hand evidence, let's say, from radar operators in Malaysia? You're relying pretty much on what you're reading in the newspapers and mainstream information, which we know is not reliable. So I didn't get sucked into this issue, and I didn't get sucked into any of the 14 conspiracy theories explained in this article. But I don't think you really have to look at the evidence of this case in order to shed some light on what most likely happened, right? And I'm going to look at some aircraft crash statistics, and I'm going to also look at the geopolitics of Malaysia, which I think shed light on what probably happened. But first, before we do that, let's listen to the words of John Lear. John Lear, who holds the world record for flying the most different types of aircraft. I was on a radio show with him recently, and this is what he said about MH370.
When all of this started, 8 hours after they made the turn, somebody knew where it was, but I didn't. Now, the way I deduced that somebody knew where it was is because on that airplane, there's many devices that send back to both Malaysian Airlines, Boeing Aircraft, and Rolls-Royce, who made the engines, exactly where that airplane is, whether the engines are turning or not, and a whole bunch of other data. That stuff is sent back to those companies, and it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop even if the circuit breakers are pulled in the cockpit, for the main reason that those people responsible for that airplane and those engines want to know exactly what's going on and where they are. They're not going to put their company future on whether a pilot is going to pull a set of circuit breakers or not. So 8 hours after they made the left turn or turn to the west, that was what would have been when they ran out of fuel. That is where somebody knew where it was. Now, we haven't heard any official statements from Rolls-Royce, who know exactly where it is, or the Boeing company, who know exactly where it is. And I think that a lot of this might be, at least the Boeing part, might be part of the Anti-Terrorist Act, where they don't want it known that they know what's going on at all times, for the reason that they want to keep that secret should they need to use that information at some time. As far as Rolls-Royce, you never know what they want, but they never made any statement on this to my knowledge, but they do know where it is.
All right, so what John Lear is saying is that if it crashed, both Boeing and Rolls-Royce would know exactly where it is. If it landed, both Boeing and Rolls-Royce would know exactly where it is. And he's even given you a suggestion as to how that information may have been suppressed by using anti-terror legislation to tell those companies that that information is secret and it cannot be made public. So that tells me that probably NORAD or the NSA would know exactly where that plane was. And that in turn tells me that this is possibly some kind of PSYOP, psychological operation. But let's look at some other information first. I spoke about Malaysia in my last year's talk, and I said that I thought that it was on America's hit list because it's Islamic, it's non-democratic, but it also has a very low US approval rating. And one of the reasons why it has such a low US approval rating is because of the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal, which has barely been reported in the UK.